Good day, everyone. Today, I want to take you on a powerful and thought-provoking journey through one of the most famous and controversial prisons in American history, the Mississippi State Penitentiary, widely known as Parchman Farm. Located in the Mississippi Delta, Parchman Farm is not just a prison. It is a symbol of America's complex relationship with punishment, labor, justice, and reform. Established in the early 1900s, Parchman was designed as a working farm, where incarcerated individuals labored in fields under strict supervision. This system reflected a harsh era of prison management that blurred the line between incarceration and forced labor. A full documentary tour of Parchman Farm reveals the stark realities of life behind its gates. From the sprawling farmland and aging prison structures to the daily routines of inmates, the documentary sheds light on a world few people ever see firsthand. It captures the discipline, isolation, and hardship that define life in a maximum security prison. The documentary also explores Parchman's troubling past, marked by racial injustice, violence, and inhumane conditions. For decades, it was known as one of the toughest prisons in the United States. These conditions sparked lawsuits, reforms, and national attention, forcing conversations about human rights and prison reform. Yet, the story of Parchman Farm is not only about suffering. It is also about change. The documentary highlights ongoing efforts to improve conditions, provide rehabilitation programs, and restore dignity to those incarcerated. Education, work programs, and mental health services show a system slowly evolving, even while facing serious challenges. A tour of Parchman Farm reminds us that prisons reflect the society that creates them. It forces us to confront difficult questions. What is the purpose of incarceration? Is it punishment, rehabilitation, or both? And how do we balance public safety with human dignity? In the end, this documentary is more than a prison tour. It is a mirror held up to history, justice, and the future of the American correctional system. Parchman Farm is one of the most historically significant prisons in the United States because its origins, structure, and legacy are deeply tied to the social, economic, and racial history of the American South. Established in 1901, the Mississippi State Penitentiary was created during a time when the region was transitioning from slavery to a new system of control over incarcerated labor. The prison was intentionally designed as a self-sustaining agricultural operation, where inmates worked long hours in fields growing crops such as cotton, corn, and soybeans. This model reflected the post-Civil War practice of using prison labor to replace enslaved labor, making Parchman Farm a powerful symbol of how punishment and economic exploitation were intertwined. Over the decades, Parchman gained national attention for its brutal conditions, strict discipline, and notorious reputation. Stories of armed guards, racial segregation, and extreme punishment made the prison infamous across the country. It became a focal point for journalists, civil rights activists, and legal advocates who exposed the inhumane treatment of inmates. These revelations eventually led to landmark court cases in the 1960s and 1970s that forced the state of Mississippi to reform its prison system. Because of this long and complex history, Parchman Farm is often studied as a case example of how American prisons evolved and how past injustices continue to shape modern correctional systems. The Mississippi State Penitentiary was originally designed as a working farm where inmates performed manual labor as the central feature of their incarceration. This system was based on the belief that hard physical work would discipline prisoners while also making the prison financially self-sufficient. Inmates were assigned to labor-intensive tasks such as planting, cultivating, and harvesting crops across thousands of acres of farmland. Daily life revolved around work in the fields, often under the supervision of armed guards on horseback, creating an environment that closely resembled plantation labor rather than a modern correctional facility. This farming model was not accidental. It was deeply connected to the economic needs of the state and the social conditions of the time. By using inmate labor, Mississippi reduced operational costs while generating profit from agricultural production. However, this system placed extreme physical demands on prisoners, many of whom worked long hours in harsh weather with minimal protection or medical care. Discipline was enforced through strict rules and severe punishment, reinforcing a culture of control and fear. The labor-based structure of Parchman Farm shaped every aspect of prison life, from housing arrangements to daily routines, and left a lasting impact on how incarceration was experienced by generations of inmates. The prison reflects a harsh era of punishment and forced labor in American history, particularly during the late 19th and early 20th centuries when incarceration was used as a tool of control rather than rehabilitation. Parchman Farm emerged at a time when the criminal justice system prioritized discipline, deterrence, and economic productivity over human rights or personal reform. Inmates were subjected to rigid schedules, physically demanding labor, and strict enforcement of authority, with little concern for their physical or mental well-being. Punishment was often public and severe, designed to instill fear and maintain order rather than to encourage change or accountability. This era was shaped by racial inequality and discriminatory laws that disproportionately targeted African American communities, leading to high incarceration rates among formerly enslaved and marginalized populations. Forced labor at Parchman became a continuation of oppressive systems under a legal framework, allowing the state to benefit from unpaid or minimally compensated work. Living conditions were often overcrowded, medical care was limited, and violence was common, both among inmates and from those in power. The prison structure and practices during this period reveal how punishment was institutionalized in ways that stripped individuals of dignity and autonomy, embedding suffering into the daily operation of the correctional system. The documentary offers a rare inside look at daily life in a maximum security prison, providing viewers with access to an environment that is typically hidden from public view. Through guided tours, interviews, and visual footage, the documentary captures the routines that structure each day for inmates, from early morning counts and meals to work assignments and lockdown periods. These routines highlight how tightly controlled time and movement are within the prison, emphasizing the loss of personal freedom that defines incarceration. Every aspect of daily life is governed by rules, schedules, and surveillance, reinforcing the constant presence of authority. In addition to routines, the documentary reveals the physical spaces that shape inmate experiences, including cell blocks, dormitories, work areas, and common spaces. The aging infrastructure, barbed wire fences, and guarded perimeters create an atmosphere of isolation and confinement. Personal stories shared by inmates and staff help humanize the environment, showing how individuals adapt to long-term imprisonment, cope with stress, and form social structures within the prison walls. By documenting these everyday realities, the film allows viewers to better understand the psychological and emotional weight of life inside a maximum security facility, beyond what statistics or headlines alone can convey. Parchman Farm has a troubled past involving racial injustice and inhumane conditions that have defined much of its historical reputation. From its earliest years, the prison operated within a deeply segregated system that mirrored the racial divisions of the American South. African American inmates were disproportionately represented and often assigned the most physically demanding and dangerous labor. Racial discrimination influenced housing arrangements, work assignments, and disciplinary practices, creating an environment where inequality was built into the structure of the institution itself. Inhumane conditions were widely documented, including overcrowded living quarters, inadequate medical care, poor sanitation, and frequent use of physical punishment. Violence was a persistent problem, both between inmates and from those in positions of authority. For many years, prison officials exercised unchecked power, allowing abuse and neglect to continue without accountability. These conditions eventually drew national attention from journalists, civil rights organizations, and legal advocates, who exposed the systemic mistreatment occurring within Parchman Farm. The prison's troubled past serves as a stark example of how racial injustice and human rights violations can become normalized within correctional systems when oversight and reform are absent. National attention and legal action played a crucial role in bringing about reforms at Parchman Farm after decades of documented abuse and neglect. As reports of violence, racial discrimination, and inhumane living conditions became widely known, journalists, former inmates, and civil rights organizations began to expose the realities of life inside the prison. These revelations shocked the public and placed pressure on state authorities to address conditions that clearly violated constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. Media coverage transformed Parchman from a remote, hidden institution into a national symbol of prison system failure. This growing scrutiny eventually led to significant lawsuits, most notably during the 1960s and 1970s, when federal courts intervened to mandate changes. Court rulings required the state of Mississippi to improve living conditions, end racial segregation, provide adequate medical care, and reduce overcrowding. These legal decisions forced the prison administration to adopt new standards of accountability and oversight. Although change was slow and often met with resistance, legal action marked a turning point in the prison's history, shifting it away from unchecked brutality toward a system more closely aligned with constitutional and human rights principles. The documentary highlights both the physical environment of Parchman Farm and the lived experiences of the inmates, creating a more complete and balanced portrayal of the prison. Visually, it captures the vast farmland, long fences, guard towers, and aging buildings that define the institution's landscape. These physical elements emphasize the prison's isolation and scale, showing how its remote location and expansive grounds contribute to a sense of separation from the outside world. The worn infrastructure and utilitarian design reflect decades of use and limited resources, reinforcing the harsh reality of confinement. Alongside these visuals, the documentary gives voice to inmates who share personal stories about their daily struggles, fears, and coping mechanisms. Their testimonies reveal how individuals navigate life under constant supervision, limited freedom, and long sentences. Correctional officers and staff may also provide perspectives on maintaining order and safety in such a challenging environment. By combining the physical setting with human narratives, the documentary moves beyond statistics and stereotypes, allowing viewers to understand how the environment shapes behavior, relationships, and survival within the prison system. Modern efforts at Parchman Farm focus on rehabilitation, education, and improving living conditions in an attempt to move away from its historically punitive model. Programs aimed at inmate rehabilitation include educational courses, vocational training, and work assignments designed to build practical skills that can be used after release. Literacy classes, GED preparation, and job training opportunities help incarcerated individuals develop a sense of purpose and personal growth, addressing factors that contribute to reoffending. These initiatives reflect a broader shift in correctional philosophy that recognizes rehabilitation as an essential component of public safety. In addition to education and training, there have been efforts to improve basic living conditions and access to health care within the prison. Mental health services, substance abuse programs, and medical care are increasingly emphasized, acknowledging the complex needs of the inmate population. While challenges such as overcrowding and limited funding remain, these reforms signal an attempt to restore dignity and provide humane treatment. The documentary presents these changes as ongoing and imperfect, illustrating both the progress made and the obstacles that continue to affect the prison's ability to fully support rehabilitation. The story of Parchman Farm raises important questions about justice and incarceration, challenging viewers to think critically about the purpose and effectiveness of the prison system. By examining its history and present conditions, the documentary encourages reflection on whether incarceration should primarily serve as punishment, deterrence, or rehabilitation. Parchman's past demonstrates how systems focused solely on control and labor can lead to abuse, inequality, and long-term harm, prompting deeper consideration of how justice is defined and applied within society. The prison's evolution also highlights broader issues such as mass incarceration, racial disparities, and the balance between public safety and human rights. Viewers are confronted with the realities faced by incarcerated individuals, many of whom come from marginalized communities and carry the effects of poverty, limited education, and trauma. These insights invite discussion about alternative approaches to justice, including reform, prevention, and reintegration. Through its portrayal of Parchman Farm, the documentary serves as a catalyst for examining how laws, policies, and social values shape incarceration outcomes and influence the lives of both inmates and the communities they come from. Parchman Farm serves as a symbol of how prison systems can change over time, yet still face significant challenges that reflect broader societal issues. Its long history, from a labor-intensive, racially segregated institution to a modern facility implementing rehabilitation programs, illustrates the potential for correctional systems to evolve in response to legal, social, and political pressures. Reforms at Parchman demonstrate that prisons are not static. They can adapt through policy changes, legal oversight, and shifts in public perception. These changes show that even institutions with deeply entrenched problems are capable of transformation when there is accountability and sustained effort. At the same time, Parchman highlights the limits of reform, as structural issues such as overcrowding, underfunding, and systemic inequality continue to affect the daily lives of inmates. The prison's legacy underscores the idea that improving a correctional system is not simply a matter of building new programs or updating facilities. It requires addressing deeper social, economic, and racial factors that contribute to incarceration. Parchman, therefore, stands as both a cautionary tale and a symbol of progress, reminding us that the journey toward a more just and humane prison system is ongoing and complex. In conclusion, a tour of Mississippi State Penitentiary, or Parchman Farm, is more than a glimpse inside a prison. It is a window into history, society, and the human experience. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about injustice, reflect on the purpose of incarceration, and consider the importance of reform and rehabilitation. By understanding Parchman's past and present, we gain insight into how prisons shape lives, communities, and the very meaning of justice. Ultimately, this documentary reminds us that the story of a prison is also the story of the society that creates it, and that meaningful change begins with awareness, accountability, and a commitment to human dignity.